Hello and welcome to the Retail Week, our look back at the biggest story of the last 7 days. I'm George MacDonald, Executive Editor of Retail Week, and I'm joined by my colleague Grace Bowden, one of our reporters, and Gemma Goldfingal, Features Editor. This week we are asking, is Brexit going to kill Christmas? It's been a week of political chaos. We still don't know what Brexit is going to look like, Today there was a profit warning from Bon Marché, which specifically flagged Brexit uncertainty as having been an important contributor. So, Grace, let's start with you. Is Brexit going to kill Christmas, do you think?
Oh gosh, I mean, it feels really grinchy to say it, but it does feel a little bit like the writing's on the wall. Obviously, every year, you get to this time. Well, maybe not every year, but certainly, let's say every year I've written for Retail Week, which has been 4 now. It feels like every year retail Christmas has gotten later and later and later. So on one hand, I'm sure there'll end up being a bit of a bonanza on Christmas Eve that'll redeem things, but I just don't think, given that November sounds like for a lot of retailers it's been such a wash, I don't see how it can be a vintage year at this point, because there's just the amount of ground that retailers have to make up and the amount of time they've got to do it in. I just don't see how it adds up personally.
Gemma, what's your take?
I agree. In some ways, I disagree, because I think in some ways Christmas has gotten earlier because of Black Friday, hasn't it? So we already have a good idea. A lot of people are doing their shopping, in November. The bulk, I think it was PwC data that said 20% of people have done the shopping by Black Friday. If that's the case, judging by the quite dismal numbers we've had from November, the writing is on the wall. I don't think it is it's going to be a vintage Christmas, and it's quite interesting because we've been in quite depressed times before, or when there's been uncertainty before, but people always splash out on Christmas as being the kind of the age-old thing that people have said. I think that Brexit is having an impact. I did a bit of a straw poll in our office to say, are you spending less because of this uncertainty, expecting it to be a bit of a mixed bag? It was unanimously yes.
Oh, really?
We are.
Yeah.
It's uncertain. We know that incomes are going up. We know that companies are being cautious. Therefore, we're being cautious as well. So, to some degrees, yeah.
I don't think it's going to be a vintage year. It wasn't really looking like that before, was it? I think it was global data forecast 2% rise across retail in the last 3 months of the year. So it's not exactly way hey. And I think, the events of this week are not going to help. So I think it'll really just power the trends that are already in evidence. I just wonder though, on the Black Friday point, that was also cited by Bon Marché. And as you mentioned, if Black Friday, November has been poor for a lot of retailers, can they rescue it in December?
So this is where I think there's a real cause for concern, because to a certain extent it would be quite easy to look at Bon Marché and not in a derogatory way, but say, well, it's not exactly like you're a 10 out of 10 retail performer ever who's suddenly having a bad year. And you could potentially look at it and go, you are using this to hang a poor performance on, but actually there are wider factors. But what I think is worrying is, both in terms of Black Friday and sort of November trading into Christmas as well, some of what you would think of as some of the more resilient players have also reported really quite difficult results. So John Lewis, over the whole course of those 3 weeks around Black Friday, overall they were down. That's worrying for a department store player who participates in it as much as John Lewis does. And then if you looking at November specifically, of the retailers that have said it's been really tough, 3 of them are really value-led retailers with a really clear proposition. You've got Sports Direct, Primark, and I anecdotally spoke to Barry Williams at Poundland as well, and all of them have individually said November was an absolute tsunami of terribleness. And those are 3 players who are really value-led, and if they've all been having a tough time and are good operators generally, it's just not, it doesn't bode well, does it?
For me personally, Primark, I can't remember Primark in the amount of years I've covered retail ever warning about challenging trading conditions to that level that they came out last Friday. When Primark's having a difficult time, the high street as a whole is.
Yeah, that's. I think when I was talking a moment ago about the trends of the year really being magnified at Christmas, fashion has had a very, very difficult time, and so I can't really see that changing. people will still spend on the turkey or their vegan versions of it, though, won't they?
Yeah, I think the grocery is probably the safest place to be right now. People are still going to have their Christmas dinners, but that discretionary spend, I think people are just spending less. And I think you mentioned earlier that global data, and I think they called it modest Christmas cheer when they put out their 2% sales growth. I might be surprised that it gets to that level.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting that Bon Marché said that they don't expect their sales trend to change until March. The month, assuming everything goes to plan, which
Judging by how it's going so far.
they don't expect any change. So that indicates after a tough Christmas, retailers could be looking forward to a pretty rocky start to the new year.
Yeah, I think, do you know what? I think Brexit's got real all of a sudden. So we've had a couple of years to adjust to this.
Totally.
But actually during that period, we've all talked about uncertainty, things like consumer confidence and actually to some degree consumer spending as well has held up. So I think now...
Bit of like a blitz spirit of, keep calm and carry on.
But I think now as we come to the crescendo of the thing actually happening, this is when things are getting real and people are adjusting spending patterns.
And also I think in an abstract way in the last few years, even though obviously it's been on the horizon, because it's been such a... I'm trying not to swear here. Because it's been such a shambles, there we go, I think there's been a little bit of uncertainty of what it's going to look like, whether or to a certain extent it's even going to happen. And I think there has been a little bit of a kind of underlying confidence of, we'll get a deal at the end of this. We're gonna figure it out. And I think even if retailers have been feeling nervous, consumers have been able to kind of hold up that level of confidence. Now the possibility of a no deal is looking more tangible and real than I think it ever really has been thought to be in the months preceding.
Yeah.
So the legitimacy of it and just how drastic it could be is really coming into focus now in a way that it can't come into focus when it's 2 years away, because you can't really imagine that. Whereas once it's within a 6-month period, it's bloody going to happen. And I do think that's going to have a knock-on effect, and is clearly.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right, George. I think the beginning of the year is going to be tough for retail. Obviously, we've got Boxing Day, Boxing Day and January sales. But, the February and March are quite slow months for retail anyway. Add into that kind of looming thing of Brexit, approaching, I think it will be difficult. Perhaps if we do officially leave the EU and all the things don't drop off the end of the cliff, maybe all of a sudden consumers will feel a little bit more confident. But I think it's going to be a rocky road.
The results from Dixon's Carphone this week and the new strategy, and Alex Baldock, the chief executive, was saying that he is preparing, doesn't want, but he's preparing for quite a messy Brexit. But he also made an interesting point. He said, he was confident that they are doing the right thing. He said, we are taking charge of our own destiny. And I think that's probably what all retailers should be doing at the moment. They really need to be on the front foot.
And prepare for the worst.
Yeah. Okay, on that bright note, we'll draw things to a close. Please let us know what you think, and do join us again next week.